Hello world, welcome to my channel, Proteus Augustus. I'm an artist, scientist, and American Constitutionist. Today is April 14th, 2020. It's been some time since I published my last video with respect to my art project. Reason being I had been trying to sell my house so that I could downsize and move to another location where I could pursue my interests. Unfortunately, that did not occur due to certain circumstances, and now we're dealing with the pandemic, which, like many of you, compounds my financial situation. So I don't know how much longer I'll have the opportunity to stay in my current house, and felt that I should put up a couple of videos with respect to why I think where we are today. First, just let me say that if you do see this video, please start with my earlier videos, starting with Roman numeral 1 sequentially, and go to my like videos and see the interview. I think there's 2 interviews with Yuri Brezhnev, who was a Soviet propagandist. I'll let those interviews speak for themselves, but I think that once you see what he has to say, maybe it will open up your eyes to where we are today. He defected in the mid-80s, not long after I got out of the military. So as I explained in my earlier videos about my art project, my opinion pieces are really where I insert my point of view. The Constitutionist papers are just my interpretation of the law and how it is and why I think that a decision should be a certain way. And I started with the odd veins, 1, 3, 5. Now I just want to address some of the even vein numbers with respect to economics and how I viewed and how I argued against others. When I was a student at the university, I took some women's studies classes. I'm an objective person. I'm not really interested in people's sexuality, their deep personality, or the facialness of a person. I am more interested in why it is that they do what they do. Because in my mind, in order to actually acquire anything in the corporeal world, you have to actually commit an act. And especially under duress, when people are under duress, you really see what kind of people they are. Now, I took a women's studies class, and one of the projects was to read up on, a feminist author and give a critique on the work. So I was like one of the OGs against social justice warriors. I mean, that you call them today. Back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, these guys were just starting to get rolling. Okay? So I read a paper with respect to hunters and gatherers, this woman was talking about, trying to say why there was a patriarchy, why men dominated. And she was trying to apply her worldview today to then. So I wrote a piece on that, in the classroom, and tried to point out that you can't deny biology. If the world was the way that she wanted it to be, then our species would have ceased to exist. It's as simple as that. Women had to carry the children, they had to suckle the children, and men had to hunt and defend their land. Otherwise, they would be taken over by somebody else, or the animals would kill them all, and then that would be, and not to mention the environment. It takes a lot of manpower to make shelter and things of that nature. So it was just a natural consequence of the species itself why males and females had certain roles. So after I got out of school and I started this art project, I used that paper to start a chain of economics and acquisition of resources. And I used communism and capitalism and the Civil War and World War II to exhibit my position that wars are fought basically over economics. And so in the first paper, I wrote this. You can see where the deer is over here. It's called Meet the Meat. So this was my challenge to that feminist. And then in 98, I believe this was 98, right? I wrote Gore for More over here. Okay? And you see the hammer and sickle. And this is where I used the example of communism and how we defeated the Soviets based on their inferior economic system. And then I went on to explain that the communists in China figured out that they could still be communists as far as socially against their citizenry, but still practice capitalism. I mean, Nixon had already been over there in the 70s, long before I wrote this paper. Hey, why not open up the world to other people? They need resources, right? But what they didn't get is these guys were not interested in changing their society to a more democrat, more open society, right? All they were interested in was acquiring assets so that they didn't get defeated like the Soviets. They learned from the Soviets. So I was astonished, after a decade or so, that our politicians simply didn't see that, okay? And the reason for that is that it comes down again to avarice. I mean, also, our social structure and our culture over the 70s and the 80s was changing to the point where regulations, demands for higher pay, all of these pain points put on industry forced them to look elsewhere to cheaper labor, because they weren't looking at capitalism from a moralistic point of view. They were looking at capitalism from a predatory point of view. How much can I make for myself, okay, and become more powerful monetarily speaking? So, of course, they, look to the east. And, why pay a guy $20 an hour to turn a wrench when they can get a foreigner to turn that wrench for $1? Okay? And then it happens in Mexico with the free trade agreement, with NAFTA. Okay? People were telling these politicians what was going to happen. It's not as though, you couldn't see the writing on the wall. But because we are in a free capitalist society, industry was free to move. That's the distinction between capitalism, okay, and communism. We can't prevent capitalists and industrialists from taking their business elsewhere. without becoming authoritarian. Okay? So they took advantage of that. Okay? Now, over the last 40 years, the Islamists got into the game too. I mean, they started using our system against us. And that's where I came up with mind the mind. Right here, mind the mind. So over the last 40 years, the Islamists and the communists have been bleeding us little by little while infiltrating our institutions of higher learning, our industry, okay, and subverting the minds of America against Americanism. Okay, that's how you get the reinsurgence of racist claims and all of these other social attacks, like, the Chinese have to save face. Why does the Chinese have to save face? Why? Because they say so? I mean, really? I mean, are we that weak? Oh, I guess we are. Now, when I was growing up, by the time I was like 13, I really pretty much had a handle on what politicians were doing, mostly from the Democratic side, although Republicans, they're just like, they do the same thing too, but not as much. But I mean, the Democrats, I mean, listen, how was it that Massachusetts could be run by one party? I mean, what is it that they had? What information did they have? What solutions did they have that made them so popular that a Republican couldn't win? And due to challenges, both, in the courts and other scenarios that I was involved in, I started to learn that they gained power because the system really wasn't for them, okay? To them, it was like, it's not what you know, it's who you know, okay? And that you can't sue City Hall. And they would fight tooth and nail and circle the wagons and use any of their political power and the mechanisms of government to knock down anybody that stood up and try to countermand even their arguments in public. To me, that's communism, okay? Plain and simple, all right? If you're born in this country, that makes you a citizen with rights. It doesn't make you an American. Americanism is a philosophy, a constitutional philosophy, okay? And they weren't abiding by that. And I can prove that, and I could prove that today. So over the years of this philosophy and undermining the American Constitution in the courts and in the schools, the youngsters that are coming up are being basically brainwashed. I mean, most people, they just listen and repeat. They don't have an analytical mind. They have what I call a mystical mind. Okay, that, it's easier for them to believe something than to go through an exhaustive analysis at a discrete level in order to ascertain what's right and wrong. And the Democrats knew how to squeeze the beast. If you were against them, you got nothing, even if you were entitled to it. Okay, if you were with them, then you got things that you weren't even entitled to get. And over the years, they just got stronger and stronger. Guys like Schiff from Massachusetts, where'd he go? He went to California. Guys like Bloomberg, where'd he go? Well, he used his money to influence elections in other states like he did here in Virginia. A lot of these people come from Massachusetts. I mean, if you go back in the Wayback Machine to when I was a sixth grader, I voted for Nixon because I felt that he would end the war. I mean, these guys weren't killers. They wanted to mitigate the situation. They didn't just want to totally dominate. So, in my opinion, if you're not fighting to win, then just get the hell out of there. Right? But everybody else voted Democrat for McGovern. And when the election came out, every state, even California and New York, the more liberal states that you see today, all right, voted for Nixon. It was only Massachusetts. So Massachusetts really, like the revolution against the Brits or England or however you want to call it back then, Great Britain, they were also part of this communist resurgence in the United States. It's just as simple as that. And if so, an objective person today, and a lot of them are in conflict. I mean, like some of these talking heads, because you know their idea of liberalism, they're starting to find out that's not what this is about. Okay, it's not about social structure and things like that. Okay, it's about national defense and security of our rights. And even the most liberal person is starting to see the encroachment on those things, and they're in conflict. But I mean, how is it that the Democratic Party, okay, would put up a guy like Joe Biden? I mean, the guy is out of it. Okay, I mean, the presidency, the executive, was meant to be a virile, strong, decisive individual. It wasn't an office to be ruled by a party or by a handful of people. And in my earlier video, I talk about that. But anyways, so what is Joe Biden? Joe Biden is just a figurehead for the party. He won't be the president if he got elected. The party will be making the decisions. And again, that's how the deep state was created, because a lot of weak executives were really just figureheads. They weren't making the decisions. The bureaucrats and the money men were really making the decisions. And if you don't see that now, I don't know what to tell you. But it has so weakened our country that this is why we are where we are today. I mean, we can't manufacture anything. I mean, we could, but the manufacturers went away. I mean, when I was growing up in school, if you just had a high school education, even if you didn't, you could get a job in a factory and have a wife and a kid and, get on with your life. Okay, that changed. All right, really early in my life. Okay? These guys figured out, hey, now listen, I don't got nothing against women wanting to work. Okay, that's not the point. The point is like the trade organizations and the unions, things start out nobly, and then they just turn into monsters. Okay, to where we are now with all this social justice, the attack on guys that look like me for some reason, without even finding out who I am as a person. I mean, they just attack people like me. For some reason, that's okay. They can't be racist. Listen, there's a lot of people on YouTube that have addressed these issues. There's no need for me to go any further. If you're really interested, you can see these conflicts now with even the liberals because of this situation. They're starting to realize that, hey, borders are important, okay? I mean, how else are we supposed to defend our way of life, okay? So every time you see someone supporting China, okay, against this country, they are communists. They're not Americans, okay? That's just the fact of nature. I mean, if you understand anything about human beings, you should be able to figure these things out. But anyways, that's basically all I wanted to say. And, that in those opinion pieces, wars are fought over resources. So it was no surprise to me that this virus was let loose. I've spent some time vetting some papers and listening to other people who have presented papers. And it's my opinion that This is not a natural virus, and it's not going away. And it's going to get worse, unfortunately. Um, and our economy is going to suffer for it, and other people are going to benefit from that. Okay? And you just need to open your eyes and see what people are doing, and what they're saying is irrelevant. What are they doing, all right, to allow this to continue? What did the CCP do to allow this to continue? It's one thing to say, hey, we didn't know nothing about it. I mean, the Islamists have been doing that to us for years with their proxy armies. I mean, we know it's coming from Iran, but our government has gotten so weak that they don't know how to really dominate a culture that's attacking us. So they just mitigate it and let them bleed us little by little over 40 years, and it's not going to stop. That philosophy will not stop this bloodletting. And it's the same thing with the communists now. Okay? They are now saying our system is better. See? Now, listen. This is not something that is serendipitous. I mean, you can call me whatever you want. I'm saying the proof is there. You just have to open your eyes. So until next time, think free and be free.